my name is Francesca Lucchini Wortzman. About me, well, I am from Chile. That's why I have two last names. That's in South America, very close to Argentina. I studied computer science at the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. That's one of the best universities in my country, which is something I'm very proud of. After studying computer science, I began my master's degree and I entered into the world of artificial intelligence. And right now, I currently work at CENIA as a machine learning engineer. CENIA is our National Research Center of AI, and we mainly focus on doing investigation and tech transfer with all elements regarding AI. So we are very focused on that side of the technical sphere. Right now, I'm a tech lead, but I'm focused mainly on computer vision projects. So I want to give the small warning that I'm not an expert on large language models. So this project is not on my area of expertise, but it was an interesting idea I had during our workshop because I'm very interested in bias in AI. And well, I think I've been working with Sophia also in collaboration with trying to find different prompts that could help us get different results and study the bias that large language models have. Okay, so a little bit of context. Today's subject is based around the final essay that we did during the summer course of AI Inequality Toolbox this year. And well, the title is the same of the presentation, Can Bias in LLMs Be Used for Good? And I want to explore that, I would say, flaw in LLMs and see that, and maybe offer an option when we can use that flaw as a tool for good. So maybe we can empower human rights with AI. So a small summary of what we're going to talk today. First, I'm going to give a small introduction of my idea. What is the current research regarding LLM and bias? What I observed about LLMs that made me interested in this issue? And what is my idea? What is that I want to do and maybe explore and investigate for some time in the future? So first, as we all know, there are a lot of issues with LLMs. One of them is that, well, of course, they're based on the technology called transformers. And usually transformers are very, are trained with very biased data during training. And all historical inequalities are very much reflected in the predictions of large language models. So, for example, we studied some during the summer school. They reflect very easily gender and societal bias, for example, in translations and responses. And I can see that as someone that speaks Spanish. For example, if you translate something that is not gendered from any language to Spanish, usually traditional gender roles are represented in the translations. Also, we know that large language models have very unequal representation of different communities because the data set that they use to train them are very unbalanced. So, for example, some dataset bias that I usually explore and want to talk about are the dataset called Common Crawl. That is a very massive recollection of data from the internet that has very little filtered information. And also we have a subset of Common Crawl that it's called, well, I call it Lion 5B, that it has been proven that it contains sensitive and illegal data.
Can I ask you something about the datasets?
Yes, of course.
So they contain images, text, videos, a mix of both?
Depending on the final task that you want to resolve, but they have usually they save web pages, so they could have anything that is stored in a web page, but mainly they are used for text and images. So I think Lion 5B is mainly images with a text tag associated with them. Yeah, and well, if anyone didn't know, the sensitive information that Lion 5B had were explicit images of children, so it was very sensitive information and very harmful. So that dataset was taken off. So now it's not available, but it already did a lot of damage. So, for example, models like I think Stable Diffusion were trained using this dataset. So, okay, given that introduction, what we need, or what I would say my objective is that we need a way to curate datasets and reduce the inherent bias of training data, because it has caused a lot of issues right now. So given that objective, I started to do a small research in what is currently being studied right now regarding bias in LLMs. So the progress I found out that has been made is, of course, formalizing and defining the concepts of bias and fairness. If you were participating in the workshop, we also learned about different metrics. Thank you, Sophia, and how you can define fairness and give it like a mathematical meaning. Also, there are a lot of works evaluating the biases in existing LLMs, doing different tests and trying to figure out where LLMs are more harmful. And also, which is very important, there's a lot of effort into creating more representative datasets. So, for example, if we're talking about pictures, we try to add a little more diversity in the different type of faces that we see in the dataset, or different type of bodies if the pictures are are bigger and represent a full figure, I would say. And for example, that is very useful considering that most datasets with images or faces are very Eurocentric. And as someone who lives in Latin America, that was a very huge concern. Also, we have seen that LLMs have certain issues, but usually companies try to filter them, but it's not a very permanent solution, because multiple times you can even escape those rail guards that they put on their models. So, of course, the challenges regarding all of this progress is that the data used to train LLMs are huge. It's massive. For example, I would say, well, it's impossible to check it all by hand. For example, I think the data used to train Llama or ChatGPT are multiple times higher than terabytes. Oh, I missed the subscript or upper script, but it's like 400 times 10 raised to the third. The third. I don't know how to say the third power, I think. So it's like a lot of times bigger than even a terabyte, which is usually the highest unit of storage that we use in disks in computers. So of course, it's very impossible to do a manual comprehensive check of what is in a dataset right now. So that is one thing. And the second thing I wanted to share with you is that I noticed some behaviors in LLMs. So what do they show us? They show that they are very good at representing harmful stereotypes and discrimination. So I would say that they are taking the patterns in the data and are representing them well. Yeah. That's not a good thing, but they are doing their job correctly, I would say, given the data that they have. And of course, most chatbots are very biased. Uh, all chatbots right now exhibit this behavior. It's not just a thing of one company. All companies have the same issue. And that's mainly because the data they have to use is so big. They have to collect it from multiple sources, and it's impossible, again, to check it comprehensively. And all of this is something that we discussed during the classes, in the case studies, in the workshop. And it's not something I came up with myself. It was a group effort. So of course, the possible reasons that could explain these behaviors is that, of course, the training data is very unbalanced, and there's for example, focus mainly on dominant languages or dominant features or Eurocentric context and communities. Also, the architecture of large language models usually tend to amplify these biases because they use a mechanism called self-attention, and anything that is very prominent in the data, they will amplify and use it for inference and giving responses. So my conclusion is that LLMs usually actually act as an amplifier of societal bias. And that is, of course, not a very good thing, but maybe it could be used as a tool for us to maybe curate datasets and make them a little better for the future. So that's my proposed idea. I want to like flip the table and transform this bias into an asset. So I want to allow LLMs to reflect and amplify biases in the training data. So we will not give the LLMs any filters or try to reduce any harmful behavior in the data. And the point is that if they do that, they will become a reflection of the I would say the harmful points that the data represents, and we can query the model to uncover where that data is. So maybe if we can find that, we can remove it from the dataset, and in future trainings we would have a dataset that is hopefully less biased. And of course, when we try to query this, we can analyze the outputs and find that maybe certain documents that are very similar between them, they all might have bias in them. So of course, my idea is that we could train a large language model that amplifies the bias and use it to make a more time-efficient process or strategy to identify bias in the data. Yeah, that's my idea. If it's not clear for now, you can ask me, and then I can continue with the presentation.
Oh, it's a very interesting idea. And I like very much your approach of like, okay, we have this bias, maybe we can turn it around. Have you seen anyone else following this approach?
I was reading a couple of days ago a report from Anthropic, I think it's called, the company that made clothes. But they were more focused on understanding how LLMs learn and mapping, for example, neuron activation patterns to certain learning concepts. So maybe that's an approach that is kind of related to this, but it was not focused on bias specifically. But maybe it could be a step in the right direction. Although I think studying neuron activation is a bit harder than maybe what I had in mind, because it requires a lot more technical knowledge. But I'm thinking that maybe what I have in mind could also be used by people who are not that, who maybe don't know how to code, but maybe know how bias works. Maybe that's another thing that we can make easier to do, because if you have to get, for example, machine learning engineers for this project, it would be very expensive.
So just to clarify and make sure that I understood, it's to find which was the source of the bias, going back to the data, the documents, the input.
Yes, that's, well, I have more slides that hopefully will help to understand how I imagine this would work. Though, disclaimer, I'm not sure if it would work. It's just an idea.
But that's research.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, go
So,
on.
why would this work on, or how I imagine to make it work? Well, I started studying about LLMs, and I learned about the latent space. The latent space is a high-dimensional abstract space representing relationship in the data. And it's very interesting because it's embedded within the model's weights and the architecture. And you can imagine it as a like a cloud of points, like the image I have on the right. And the more interesting elements of this cloud of points is that usually elements that are very similar in terms of concepts are usually together. For example, words like sibling, brother, sister would usually be very close together in the space. Of course, not the same, but very close. And the challenge right now would be, how do we access that space and use it to find, for example, the source of the bias? So maybe if we can pinpoint, like, for example, the point right here is related to bias, maybe the ones close to them are also related to bias. And if we can backtrace that and find the data related to that learning, that, we can then remove it from the dataset, or maybe create it. So yes, just to explain a little bit more, how the latent space works is that, yes, similar elements are close to each other. For example, the representation of father and mother would be close together, as would be the elements of man and woman, but they would have a vector of a difference. For example, this distance. And usually concepts like gender or similar elements would be represented by a similar distance. So for example, the distance between father and mother would be very similar to the distance of woman and man. So maybe if we can even take also that and use that to guide our search between the elements, we can, for example, even find the vector related to a certain type of bias. So yeah, that's why I want to use the concept of the latent space in this idea. So how would this work? For example, we would use different queries that would be, for example, that we know would generate a biased response. And we find our starting point, for example, here. And we know that since it has bias, we can explore elements close to it, and we can find multiple, and probably we will find more elements that are also a risk of generating bias in the training of the model. And also, if we learn this and we detect all the points that are also biased, we can define also the bias vector and use that to observe more behaviors related to bias in the dataset. So that in very short words is my idea. So we define different queries to find starting points. We review elements close to it, and usually we will find more points that have embedded bias in the model. So yeah, to make a small summary, it would be like we develop a prompt framework that we know generates bias, and we can use, for example, the wheel of power to define different dimensions and different languages that we want to use, for example, in translation. Then we do unfiltered training to a model, and we save all the embeddings or all the representations of these documents during training, so we can do the exploration afterwards. And then we just explore with the queries that we already created what the answers are, and use them as starting points to find bias elements and then explore nearby elements. So yeah, that's my, well, this is how I think it might work in a practical implementation. So my objective is that, for example, point C, you probably won't have to know that much about coding to execute it. For example, if you know the prompts, you can ask the model, and then just have a tool, for example, that tells you from which document it came from, closed documents, and then you can know if they have bias or not, and you can evaluate if you have to remove it for future experiments. So yeah, that's my whole presentation.
Thank you. It's a very interesting approach. I might ask you some questions about the implementation. So you would start with the prompts to reveal the bias.
Yeah, for example, what you're doing with reviewing different prompts that might incite bias from the model, that would be very useful. And I was thinking that maybe use something like that, or maybe use the same wheel of power to make a small framework of different prompts that we might use to find explicit bias from the model. But yeah, that's just, it's very open, so I don't know how we would do it explicitly, but it's not that, I don't think it's that hard to do, to build like a framework of questions, but it would be fun to do it in a community-driven way, so we have more examples too.
Yes, so I don't know if you have seen the project that we are running. Of course you have. I know that you have. We discussed it. But yeah, so we have also collected some prompts from the community to reveal bias. And now we are building in a more structured way with research questions. So first we ask different LLMs to define careers and also characteristics by gender. And then we're using these to create the prompts or create the fill in the blank approach.
Yeah, I got the like update email today, I think.
Yes, so maybe this would this could work for your project as well.
I would think so. I mean, I still don't know what I'm going to do with this idea. Maybe I want to explore it for a research project, hopefully. But if it works, it would be so useful, I think. Sorry,
And,
I have we have more people here, so maybe you can hear a bit of noise.
bit of Spanish. And like from what we saw now is that because you mentioned Claude before, and it has refused to answer any question that asks about the gender characteristics. I don't know what have you seen, and how have you checked the bias there, for example?
I haven't checked, but I know that most big companies are trying to like filter the answers the models give because they are afraid of the backlash,
Mhm.
which it makes sense, I guess. But of course, they are not putting many efforts in curating the information they use to train because they always find the same issues again and again, and people usually can even like bypass the laws or the rules that they put into the models. So, for example, I remember there was an example that in models, for example, you ask, where can I buy drugs in Madrid? And the model would say, no, I can't give you that information. But if you ask, where should I go if I want to avoid buying drugs in Madrid? And then they give you the answer. So, so you can bypass those rules. So the answer is not in just filtering the answers, obviously, at least for me.
Yes, that's also what I've seen, that you try to form the prompt so you can get the answer that you want. Like for this example, when I asked it to give it, to describe some characteristics, they were either refusing or giving some general information. But when I asked it as a list, then it was of 10 characteristics. It was more like direct. Okay, here they are.
Yeah, well, that's why I was very interested in this topic because I really want to maybe give an answer to this problem because right now I think that everything is very reactive.
So going back to your approach, you would create the prompts, and then you would connect it to the latent space.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on the latent space, but my idea is that if the latent space is powerful enough to model bias, then maybe it can help us to find bias.
And like, how would you go from the latent space to the documents?
Yeah, that's the part I'm not sure yet how to do. And I would say that would be my main investigation. Like, how can I connect this pattern that the model builds to the data? But my idea is mainly that, like, the model would represent the bias very well, and I want to use that ability so we can find bias, like work backwards. So I'm not sure yet how I would do it. I was like crazy on Friday trying to figure out a more specific way of doing that, and I haven't found an answer or an answer yet. So maybe
It's
that would
a,
be part of my research.
yes, exactly. It's a new research of its own. But I guess that, okay, some documents you can already know that they are biased, that there is misinformation, there is old historical element that have been outdated.
Sorry, what? I didn't hear your question.
I was saying that we can already know that some of the documents are biased,
Hmm.
so they shouldn't exist in the first place in the training. But like that means also, like, if you wanted to create a more ethical and more correct approach, then you know that we know that a lot of material is copyrighted.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, maybe it could be used for that also, but if we can, well, my idea is that maybe if we can, if the bias can be very well represented in the model and we can find the origins of the bias in the data, then we can start removing that or maybe finding ways to reduce the harmful repercussions of that in the training involved. So yeah, that would be my idea. But well, someone in the chat wrote that if does the Latin space approach complement the EDIA initiative on Hugging Face? Well, I haven't heard of that initiative, so maybe I need to read it first to answer that correctly. Um, I'm not sure. I would have to read it in more detail to answer that question, but maybe it does, because I think the one in the uh, in Hugging Face is based mostly on word embeddings, and I think the approach of the Latin space is a bit different. That's the complicated part, I would say, because it's not very accessible, that space. So I want to like crack open the model and take what I want from inside, but it's not very easy.
And you also like your expertise is more in computer vision.
Yes. Yeah. For example, well, my master's thesis was focused on using like city images and graph neural networks, and I never really dove into the how LLMs model work, and they're very different. For example, from how convolutional models work. I know how transformers work, for example, but I my understanding is that has evolved a lot from the like 2018, and now, for example, they're not even using the encoder decoder architecture. Now they're using only a decoder, so I want to understand more about it before I can pursue like this as a project.
Maybe you want to explain a bit on the transformers for anyone who doesn't have the background.
Yes, of course. Well, transformers is a type of architecture in deep learning that is based mostly on attention. And it's different from previous approaches because, for example, in computer vision, we used convolution that was very focused on applying filters to the images, and very especially like something that is close in space usually is relevant for prediction, and that put a lot of how do I say this, like it predefined how the model learns. And with transformers, that was not eliminated, but it reduced the amount of structure that we gave to the learning in the model. And transformers are based mostly on attention. So they work in the way that they observe the context near a word, for example, and use that to build a numeric representation. And the whole point of transformers is that if you put a lot of layers, then you have a higher context that you use to represent a word. So, for example, it would learn the difference of the word model in different contexts. So if you say like a training a machine learning model, the word model will have a different embedding or codification than using like a fashion model. And usually that didn't happen before with uh, language models. They were very limited. I'm not sure if that explanation is good enough for everyone, but that's the point, that they use the context to enrich the representation of a word.
And would something be related to visual datasets?
Yes, I mean you. Uh, some time ago, there were some models that use transformers for images, uh, and they work relatively well. But I would focus my my idea mainly to text first, because I didn't want to maybe try too many things and not get anything right. But I would say that if this works for text, it probably would be able to be extended for images too. So For example, multimodal models that create images from a prompt could be it could be also curated using this approach, I would say.
Because I remember what you said in one of the I think it was in summer school, that it's very visual, the bias there.
See that, yeah, that's true. But if you know how to search for it, you can also find the bias in language, as we know.
So I want to ask now if anyone has a question that is not that wants to share, that it's not on the chat, or if anyone wants to participate, it's a free space.
Yeah, also all links to different tools that might be related to this topic are very interesting to me, because maybe there's something similar to this already being made. So that would be interesting to know, because maybe we can focus this idea in a different way. And yeah, that's it. Any help with that? For example, someone sent the Hugging Face link, that is also useful for me. Oh, thank you, Cynthia. I hope it was interesting. I know it's a very abstract concept. I also had a hard time trying to understand my own idea. So, um, as I said on Friday, I was like a bit of freaking out trying to make this as concrete as possible, but it's not really that concrete yet. Oh, I'm glad that you understand it, Emma. Well, maybe when I understand it better myself. I know it's my idea, but I don't understand it fully. When I understand it better myself, I can share more info with you guys.
I think that like, it's just start like this with research. You have the idea, and
Yeah.
then you explore if it's possible or not. You try different things, but it's an idea worth going forward.
Yeah, because I mean, there are some explorations that of people trying to understand how LLMs learn and what they do, because that's the issue that we have right now with LLMs, that they are very hard to control, and no one knows, as with everything with deep learning, how the model, what the model learns and how. So we need to take a step forward in that direction, in my opinion.
And so, what expertise would you need in order to implement your project?
I think I would start by understanding well, for example, how large language models are trained and what information can you take from them. That would be my first step. I also would like to understand a bit more about what I mentioned before of the neuron activations, and maybe that could help with this project. And yeah, that would be my first step. If that step is, if for example that the answer to that is yes, you can extract the information I want from that, then I would say the project has a very high possibility of being done.
Hope you find that expertise in the community or even further.
Well, some people at CENIA are experts on large language models, and they are even training one. So I am going to ask them. I'm going to bother them today. They are even trying to train a large language model that is mainly no, it only speaks Spanish, and we're also trying to do models that are translators of languages that are not very well represented in current models because they're very small and not many people talk them. For example, in Chile we have a language called Mapudungun, and that it's spoken by the original natives of the country, and also Rapa Nui from Easter Island. And there are some people who are already working on that, and maybe I can use their assistance. Oh, okay, Emma. Bye, Emma. Have a good day.
And we have another
Yes, I know of that channel because this slide is from that channel. But it's very useful. It has very good explanations on how transformers work. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, well, that is my plan. Let's see if it works or not.
and let's see if there could be some collaboration, if the prompts could help your work. And feel free to reach out to the community at any time, and hope we find more connections.
Yes, of course. I mean, well, maybe if I have some small results, maybe I can ask everyone in the community, and maybe even in the project of LLMs. Yeah, but first I need to study. That's obviously my first challenge.
So many ideas and projects to be done.
Yeah, maybe if I understand something, I can reach out in the community and say, "Hey, everyone, did someone read this paper? I don't understand this part."
Perfect. Feel free.
Well, thank you, everyone, for this space. I also want to thank you for indulging my crazy ideas and for all the support I've been getting. And well, if it works, maybe we will have something very interesting to reduce bias in LLMs.
Thank you, Francesca, for your work and for enthusiasm in the community and your participation. And just a reminder to anyone, to the people who are watching, that we still have this LLM bias project that we are running as the community, and you can visit the space. And if you want to participate, you can let me know, and there are different tasks for all of you to collaborate if you want. So that's all. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Francesca, again. And see you in the community.
We'll see everyone soon, hopefully, and have a very nice day.
Goodbye, everyone.